The Panthers starters may not play at all this preseason, and if that's the case, how long will it take for them to mesh this year? I'll answer that question among other listener questions on this mailbag edition of Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Subscribe or follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, where on Wednesdays throughout the regular season, I'll be right here answering your weekly Wednesday mailbag questions. All you got to do is either at me or DM me, but of course, follow me on Twitter at Julian Council to get those questions in for the weekly Wednesday mailbag right here on Locked On Panthers. Today's episode of Locked On Panthers is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Here on this Thursday edition of the show, we're going to do a mailbag. Did not have enough questions to do a mailbag like I wanted on Wednesday. That's okay. Y'all took your time, but you got them in, so appreciate all the folks who brought in questions and all folks who gave me questions after I recorded or got them in and I didn't choose them. I'll answer them either on a later edition of the show, but probably answer them via your DMs there on Twitter. So appreciate that again for all the folks that sent in questions for this week's mailbag. Let's go ahead and start off with Matthew. Panthers head coach Dave Canales is non-committal to whether the starters are going to play on Saturday. He was asked about it on Tuesday. He was asked again on Wednesday, said he needs to speak to Dan Morgan and the training staff to figure out who they have available, what their plans are. And Matthew has a question about that and the Panthers' overall depth. Matthew saying, with the depth on this Panthers roster being roughly that of a kiddie pool, I understand Canales' decision not to play the starters in the preseason. It's no fun to watch, but I do understand as there's simply no one to replace these guys. If they get hurt, it's a byproduct of rebuilding / restocking the league's worst roster. That said, how long do you think it will take for our ones to get in game shape once the season starts? A month, more, less? Good question, Matthew. And you do bring up a good point about the lack of depth here on this roster, which we saw play out in that opener against New England. We saw it again this past weekend against the Jets. And as you mentioned, it's no surprise considering this team's coming off a 2-15 season. And of course, they're going to have the worst depth in the NFL. And look at seasons past. It's not like the Panthers have had a ton of depth over the last 5 or 6 years as they struggled to win 5-7 games, falling short of the playoffs all those years since 2017. When one of their key players goes down, they struggle. In the secondary, when J.C. Horn's not been around, guys like C.J. Henderson and Keith Taylor in the past have not stepped up. We have seen those issues play out time and time again last year with no Austin Corbett for all but 4 games. Brady Christensen out for 16 games. They struggled to replace those two. Cade Mays, Calvin Throckmorton, Chandler Zavala, all those guys, including others, were not able to get the job done in the interior at guard. So they were already razor thin a year ago, and this year it seems to be the case. So yeah, I can agree with you from that standpoint that it would make sense for Dave Canales to maybe not play the starters. But also, when you look at it on the other side of things, they're coming off a 2-15 season where their quarterback, Bryce Young, still unproven, new offensive weapons, and albeit they have had a good connection, him and Deontay Johnson, him and Adam Thielen, you want to see it in game. Bryce Young had a great connection last year at Wofford with DJ Chark, but did that carry over to the season? No, it did not. So that could be a concern for a lot of people. A new offensive line that's had a lot of time together, and understand, now I guess they haven't had a lot of time together on the field in preseason games, but understand this, they spent a lot of time together in the offseason. These guys have been pretty healthy. There's been times where Damian Lewis had to step out, but overall, that starting five of Ickey, Lewis, Corbett, Hunt, and Moton, they've been out there all together since April. They didn't skip the voluntary portion. They were all there for mandatory minicamp, all have, for the most part, been there for training camp. You can't discount the valuable reps and time that they're getting together, even if most of that was spent not in pads. So I do understand the concern. I understand the logic that Canales is using, as there have been some questions about the depth there on the offensive line. If Damian Lewis is not going to play, do you want to play Brady Christensen in that spot or Chandler Zavala in that spot? And I don't know if that would be the wisest thing to do. And there's been some issues also with receivers. Dane Jackson, he's a little banged up. Chuba Hubbard, they haven't had the full complement of offensive players, looking especially at tight end, as well as Ian Thomas and Tommy Trimble have been out. But as far as how long will it take for them to mesh, I don't really know. Whether they play on Saturday or not, week 1 in New Orleans will be the first time that the starters in Carolina have faced off against the starters of an opposing team in a real game setting. They had that joint practice last Thursday with the Jets, but outside of that, they have not seen another team's ones, and they will not see another team's ones until week 1 down in New Orleans. And the hope is that they'll be ready to go. That Canales and the training staff trying to be smart by preserving these guys' bodies. Anybody who had a soft tissue injury, holding them out maybe longer than they needed to. The hope is that they'll come out, be ready to go, and they will not miss a beat. Now, the reality of it is, I don't think that even had they gotten a ton of time in the preseason, that we were going to see this well-oiled machine offensively in the first couple of weeks because of all the changes. And this is something I told y'all last year. Rookie quarterback, bunch of new pieces on the outside, new offensive scheme. It's going to take time. And we saw how long it took last year, where they were never on the same page outside of, yes, those 3 quarters against Green Bay. They were never up to speed. My hope is that it's not going to take all season or not at all for it to happen. I think it will happen. I just think you're going to have to be a little bit patient, which I know you don't want to hear, and it's going to open up Dave Canales to criticism, which I have mentioned before. If someone gets hurt, it's tough luck of the preseason, but I don't know a lot of people who don't want to see this team play their starters, especially on offense, after being such an abysmal unit last year. But again, I can understand his logic there, as they have had some injury issues throughout the preseason, like a decent amount of injury issues throughout the preseason and in training camp. I really can't answer this question, Matthew. I don't know whether it's going to be week 2 it clicks, week 4 it clicks, or right out the bat it clicks. We'll just have to wait and see. I do think that it's going to be a little bit slow, and then I think they can get going. You would want to get going at least by week 4 with Cincinnati coming to town. And I do think they have some games early on against New Orleans where this offense can get things together. I don't think the Saints are that formidable of a defense this year. The Chargers, as well, as they've struggled defensively in the past, and then Las Vegas. Those are 3 teams that are going to have varying expectations. And I think 3 teams the Panthers can certainly compete with before facing off against Cincinnati. And by that first month, that this team should really be coming into its own. We should know what they can be and who they are after this first 4 games. So there is a long answer to your question there, Matthew. Nick asking a question about Bryce Young, as we get questions about Bryce Young every single week here on the show, and gotten this kind of similar question before. Nick asking, do you think this coaching staff truly believes in BY being successful, or is it reasonable to think that they are planning on getting a high pick in 25 to draft a better prospect? There has been a lot of commentary from you and others about how they drafted for next year, not this year, as you look at Jonathan Brooks, he brings up, Jatavion Sanders, even Xavier Legette, Shaw Smith-Wade. A lot of those picks seem to be more focused on what they're building in the future, not necessarily about trying to win right now, which is a departure from what we've seen in the past from former Panther regimes, whether it was Matt Rule as a head coach, Frank Reich last year, and of course Scott Bitter as a GM. He also goes on to say, and Canales talking about how he's going to be stubborn about running the ball. It doesn't seem like those things are cause for confidence that this staff thinks Bryce Young is the answer, and that they might want a fresh start with the right guy next year. For what it's worth, he believes Jalen Milroe and Shadur Sanders are far better athletes to use in a run-heavy scheme. I don't think Dave Canales is looking to run his quarterback. He wasn't running Baker last year. He wasn't running Geno Smith the year before, when he wasn't even calling the plays, but still, that wasn't what Seattle did. So I don't think that they're necessarily looking for a Jalen Milroe or Shadur Sanders to be that running quarterback. And it's not like Shadur runs that much either. He's more of a pocket passer. And Milroe needs to utilize his legs because his arm, it's a great cannon arm, but man, he's not accurate. I don't think he's going to be a top prospect anyways. I was looking at ESPN.com on Wednesday before recording the show. Field Yates, he put out a mock draft, and God dang you, Nick, you have me looking at mock drafts in August. Field Yates has Carson Beck from Georgia going number 1 overall to the Giants. He has Shedeur going number 4 overall to the Titans. I can't see Dion letting that happen. But Quinn Ewers from Texas, he has him going number 8 to the Raiders. Only 3 teams, Field Yates believes, are going to take quarterbacks in the first round next year. And there's been a lot of talk about how next year's draft class is not great. And we've heard this before. Back in 2021, the Trevor Lawrence, the Mac Jones, the who else? Justin Fields, Trey Lance, Zach Wilson, that draft class was considered a great quarterback draft class. And the one after it in 2022 was considered to be very poor. And you know that draft class yielded the Panthers Matt Corral. There was Sam Howell. There was also Desmond Ridder. There was Kenny Pickett and Malik Willis. And those guys, outside of Howell, have turned out to not really be great players at all. I'm not saying Howell's a great player, but Howell started a full season, and he may get an opportunity in Seattle this year with Geno Smith having dealt with some injuries in the preseason. That was not a great class. The NFL world was right about that, but they were wrong about 2021. Trevor Lawrence, he got paid. I still think Trevor has a long ways to go to live up to being that number 1 overall pick billing. Things are better in Jacksonville, even though they had some issues at the end of last season. As we know, Trey Lance, his time is pretty much done to be a starter, as he's like the 3rd string in Dallas right now behind Dak and Cooper Rush. Mac Jones, he's back home in Jacksonville, and he's not going to be the starter after, of course, Trevor Lawrence, as I just mentioned, got paid a ton of money. Zach Wilson's QB3 out in Denver, and he's no good. And then Justin Fields may get an opportunity down the road in Pittsburgh, but so far 1 of 5 have made it as far as getting a big-time contract and still being a starter 3 years later, where we'll see what happens with the draft class that just happened this past spring. We got Michael Penix sitting behind Kirk Cousins for the foreseeable future in Atlanta. Bo Nix is a starter in Denver. That just got named on Wednesday. J.J. McCarthy's out for the entire season. He'll probably take over next year unless Sam Darnold finally plays like the guy people have been telling me for years. Daniel Jeremiah, I know he's still holding on to that. Same thing with Dan Orlovsky. Maybe they'll finally be right. I don't know. And then we also have Drake May in New England, who could be the starter, and he's at least going to sit, maybe start off, but he could be the starter at some point this season. Jaden Daniels, and then number 1 overall, Caleb Williams, who looks outstanding so far in his first 2 preseason games. Like, that looks like a good quarterback draft, but in all likelihood, only 2 of the 6 are actually going to turn out to be that guy, and then maybe another one will be just okay in a journeyman as a spot starter down the road. So I look at next year's class, like, Beck is good. I don't think the Panthers are looking at Carson Beck as the guy that they think is going to fix this team. And then Shedeur, solid player as well. But like I said, I don't think Dion's letting him go to the Titans. I damn sure don't think he's going to let him come here to Carolina if they can handle it. And you can say that the Panthers and whatever team, they can draft him and Dion can't dictate things. I don't know if I want that headache. We'll just see. And in Quinn Ewers, haven't been super impressed by him. And does he get hurt again, which has happened the first 2 years he's been a starter at Texas, and does Arch Manning take over and is even a top 10 pick? Now, there's 3 other guys I'm looking at who I think could potentially have some sort of breakout year in college that were uber recruits. That's Connor Wegman from A&M, Cade Klubnik from Clemson, and Drew Aller from Penn State. One of those guys I think could pop off and end up being a top 5 pick next year, just based off of their size and what the recruiting rankings were and expectations for them coming out of high school. I just don't think that next year the Panthers are targeting quarterback. And I went back, and I'm not trying to sound like a narcissist, I went back and listened just to a couple of the first episodes I did when I started doing this back in March of 21, just to remember what exactly I said about this team. And I talked about how I did not feel like Sam Darnold was the right decision, and how I didn't think it'd be a bad thing to keep Teddy Bridgewater because I felt like this team had bigger needs. I think this team still has bigger needs in quarterback. I still don't think they have enough receivers to help whoever the quarterback's going to be down the road. Like, this could only be it for Thielen and Johnson with Bryce Young. So they need more proven guys that are going to be franchise dudes, and they're hoping Leggett can be that. But outside of Leggett, who of the younger guys do you really trust to be that? So they still need more receivers. I think offensive line-wise, they may need another tackle soon if Moton's not going to hold up. Corner, they still need another one long-term opposite of JC. They're going to have to figure out safety, edge rusher. They need like two of them. I still feel like there's bigger needs for this Panthers team. And at the end of the day, David Tepper and Nicole Tepper, it's going to be their decision on whether the Panthers move on from Bryce Young or not after the season. I just don't think that's going to happen. He would have to have a disastrous year like a Zach Wilson a couple years ago for Carolina to move on from him. And I just do not see that happening with all that has been corrected around him offensively, even though I still don't see the high-level skill position talent. I just don't think that Dave Canales was hired to bring in another quarterback in 25. He took the job because he believes in Bryce Young. He took the job also because David Tepper wants him to do what he did for Bryce Young, like he did for Baker Mayfield and for Geno Smith in Tampa and Seattle, respectively, the last 2 years. I don't look at what he said and the moves as being moves that show that secretly they don't believe in Bryce Young. I don't think that is true at all. And looking at next year's class, I think it's a lot better than the one in 22. I just don't think that's a class where you're looking at trying to get another top quarterback after putting so much into Bryce Young, and they still are paying for those assets again next year as they had traded away that second-round pick. Now, they got it back. Good job at Dan Morgan. I don't think they're ready to move off of Bryce just yet. All right, let's take a quick pause, and I'll come back and answer more of your weekly, well, no day this week, but your mailbag questions here on Locked On Panthers. Football season is almost here, and some would argue that it is here. And the best way to get to games this fall is with Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Game Time Picks curation makes it easier to say more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. Get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. Take the guesswork out of buying concert tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, let's answer more of your mailbag questions here on this Thursday. Again, next week, no mailbag, as I'll be reacting to the Panthers' initial 53-man roster. Then I'll be looking at some moves they make a day afterwards. And I'm going to be out of town, actually, throughout the weekend, Labor Day weekend going on. One last chance to get away before the craziness of football season being in full force. So no show on next Friday, but I'll be back Labor Day. And, of course, all that week leading up to the Saints game. So that will be the next time we do the weekly Wednesday mailbag, I believe, on the 4th of September. So get those questions in by either adding me or DMing me on Twitter at Julian Council after the whole roster situation is not figured out, but they get down to 53. Okay, let's see. The one thing the Panthers do need to figure out is corner. And Stone, he didn't even ask a question, really. Well, he did ask a question, but he just posted a list of available free agent corners and asked me, do you like anyone on this list? And the 5 that I pointed out that I was interested in are Xavier Howard, who was formerly of the Miami Dolphins, Dane Jackson, formerly, most recently, of the New York Giants, Patrick Peterson. I don't even know where he was last year, to be honest with you. J.C. Jackson, formerly of the Patriots, and Akello Witherspoon, most recently, with the Los Angeles Rams. I don't know if, okay, Patrick Peterson, I'll take him off the board. He's too old. I'm not really interested there. Jackson, there had been some talk, and I brought him up earlier in the offseason. There was some discussion that potentially he could be someone that would go back to New England. And I don't know if we can have someone called J.C. Jackson where there's already J.C. Horn and Dane Jackson. That would just be too confusing for me and I think everyone else involved. But a good player, got paid a ton in San Diego, I guess L.A., the Chargers now, and that didn't really work out. Dane Jackson has a lot of speed, and the Panthers can always use some speed, but that's not offensive speed they'd be using. And then Xavier Howard as well. I don't I don't think any of those guys really stand out to me as being must-haves. Now, if the Panthers can get one of them, I do think that would be good business for the right price, and I don't think they're going to pay a pretty penny for any of them. I also think that right now we need to sit here and wait to see how the roster shakes out once they get from 90 to 53 and who they keep at corner, and then also who gets cut around the NFL. Going back a couple years ago, and understand Matt Rule, his staff didn't do a good job. They did pick up Rasul Douglas off of the waiver wire. And it's not like Douglas had the best year in Carolina, but he went on to Green Bay and was a really damn good player. And he was quoted saying that he kind of was falling out of love with football and that he didn't have coaches that really believed in him until he got to Carolina, and Matt Rule and that staff believed in him, and that really helped him turn things around. So Carolina can find a starter, and I don't know who that's going to be, but I think they can find somebody off the waiver wire for cheaper than what they would have to pay. I think any of these guys who are probably still holding out from taking a deal, or maybe teams just aren't interested in them because of a various amount of reasons. Now, Witherspoon, I don't know if Raheem Morris's scheme defensively is the same as a Jero Avero's. I have to imagine it's got to be pretty similar, considering that they both spent a decent amount of time on the Rams staff. And if that's the case, Witherspoon already knows this scheme, having played in it last year. And he's also played in San Francisco. There's been some crossover between those two organizations for years now, with McVay being there in LA, and of course Shanahan being in San Francisco, and the relationship dating back to their time spent in Washington with then known as the Redskins. So it's possible that Ahkello Witherspoon may be the best scheme fit if that is the case. So that would be a name I think that probably sticks out to me the most, just based off of his recent history and where he's been before, and maybe he could instantly come in. But the Panthers are going to need to find somebody else, as it looks like they're going to be without Dane Jackson for maybe the first 3-4 weeks of the season. As last week, Dave Canales said it is a significant hamstring injury, and he gave us a 6-week timeline. Another question here, and these are two really about the roster. Kev asking, who's one player do you think could surprisingly make the 53-man roster, and one you think could be surprisingly cut? The surprise, I'm going to say Terrace Marshall Jr. I've been pretty steadfast. I don't think he's going to make the roster. This team wants to trade him. I don't know if they're going to get that deal done prior to Tuesday at 4 p.m. And maybe he can make the roster if he's still sticking around, just so the Panthers could still try to find a way to move on from him via trade. Don't know if he has a market at all. Hard to believe that he would have one after last season when he didn't have one. Not like he's done too much to impress so far outside of that joint practice against the Jets, and then even on Saturday night against the Jets in the preseason game. And then the surprise cut would be Raheem Blackshear. They're going to keep Chuba Hubbard. We know that. They're going to keep Miles Sanders, and eventually Jonathan Brooks is going to help out. And Blackshear has not played in the first 2 preseason games. I think it's more so that they've been holding out, but they've been using Amir Smith-Marset a lot as a returner on kickoffs, and we know he's going to be the punt return guy. And this team really, really likes Mike Boone. If they like Mike Boone a lot, and he's been also starting to return some kicks, maybe he makes the roster over Raheem Blackshear. So that's one that may be a surprise to some folks out there. Chuck has another question about roster cuts, asking, at this point with the season upon us, would you recommend us taking a chance on Jalen Coker over Terrace Marshall Jr. for that last receiver spot? I know TMJ has had a decent training camp, but it never seems to translate to games. Yes, that is true. It only translated for those 10 weeks and the end of 2022 when Steve Wilkes was the head coach and he was the number 2 opposite of DJ Moore. Coker's not going to make the team, man. Just going to be honest with you. Dude has not made plays in camp, has not made plays into preseason. He's pretty slow too, which is why he went undrafted after putting up some good numbers there at Holy Cross, and probably why a guy his size also is playing in the FCS. There's guys that get missed on, and he probably was a FBS player anyways, but still, he's not going to make the roster, and we'll see. A lot of teams like them coming out of the draft when he went undrafted, and he may not be someone the Panthers are able to bring back to the practice squad, even though I think they probably would like to do that. I don't think they're going to take a chance on him. I would think that it'd be TMJ who they take, as they maybe see some value there potentially to trade. I don't know what the value's actually there. That's just from what I've seen, and also a little bit of source information there for y'all here on the show today. All right, one more quick pause. I'll come back and answer the rest of your mailbag questions here on the show in just a moment. You've heard me talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you today. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel any time. And I know plenty of y'all listen to the show, watch the show, and don't live here in the Carolinas, cannot get the Panthers games on. The best way to do it is by just betting $5. You could win money, and then you save money 3 free weeks. And I've had YouTube TV forever now, and I love it. And I think it's the best way for you to watch sports, period, as they have a ton of games on channels and all that. Go ahead. $5. That's all it is. You can win money, save money, 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket. All you have to do is just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. A couple more questions here on this mailbag edition of Locked On Panthers. Of course, I've gone longer than I should have because I'm a gas bag, but appreciate y'all watching and listening to the show. Appreciate all the folks who put in questions for this week and those who asked questions. I did not get to them. Just check your DMs. I'll get back to you as soon as I have time. Again, either at me or DM me, but of course, follow me on Twitter to get the questions in for next week's show. Brandon, first time he's asked a question, and he had a lot to say in his DM. Appreciate the folks that make me think, have a lot to say, but also brevity, it is key. But Brandon had to say this, given Jack Anderson, who the Panthers signed 10 days ago, according to PFF, played well in his limited snaps his rookie season and had a bit of a sophomore slump before having a 2023 season disrupted by an injury and sitting behind a Pro Bowler in Quentin Nelson and a decent starting caliber guard in Will Freeze up in Indianapolis. He seems like a solid option for depth at offensive line. In 2022, the last time he played significant time, he graded out almost twice as good as Chandler Zavala did in 2023. Obviously, his stellar performance on Saturday shows worth, not to mention his history at the center position likely being a better backup option than Cade Mays. Hard to justify not keeping him over Zavala or Ricky Lee if he puts on a decent performance against Buffalo. Now, I did go look at those Pro Football Focus numbers from Jack Anderson, who back in 2021 as a rookie in Philadelphia only played 81 snaps, so has 71.0 overall grade, 73.1 pass blocking grade, and a 68.0 run blocking grade. Then in 2022, the season where Brandon brings up he had a little bit of sophomore slump in New York with the Giants, 148 snaps, 47.9 overall grade, 49.6 pass blocking grade, 55.2 run blocking grade. Yikes all around. But you compare that to Chandler Zavala last year. Zavala had a 26.2 overall grade and a 7.1 pass blocking grade and played twice as many snaps as Anderson played during that 2022 season. And we all know Zavala was brutally bad at points of times last season, like the 0 blocking grade he got in that Seattle Seahawks game where the Panthers lost Andy Dalton as a starting quarterback. And going back to Saturday and bringing up Jack Anderson, he had a 90.3 grade, the top overall grade of all offensive players on Saturday in that preseason game for Carolina against New York. And there was an opening. We got the top 5, as we talked about, Icky, Damian Lewis, Robert Hunt, Austin Corbett, Taylor Moton. I'm just surprised I'm able to remember that stuff off the top of my head all the time. I repeat it all the time, so you would think I should never forget, but I still just cannot believe I have all these names. I don't forget. I'm gonna start forgetting them. But Brady Christensen, you have him as well. That's the top 6. And Josh Nyman, we'll see whether he starts the season off on PUP, if he's available or not. I'll count him as 7 right now. And then there's 2 spots in my mind that are available, and Cade Mays would have that other spot. But if Cade Mays is not going to be healthy, maybe he gets Lamar Jackson treatment and the Panthers injure him and they keep Jack Anderson and then they keep Chandler Zavala. Possible that happens. But if Anderson plays well again, it's going to be tough not to keep him around when he already has experience as a guy who's had to play as a spot starter and also gotten backup starts in the NFL before. So that is a good find for a guy to come in and then 5 days later, play the way he played last Saturday. Kudos to him and kudos to Dan Morgan and this scouting staff for being able to identify him as potentially someone who could help him. Now he needs to do it again against Buffalo. Going to be playing against twos again, and we'll see if he's able to sneak his way onto the roster. But that is definitely one of the people to look out for, and I'll talk about that on tomorrow's show, what to look out for in the preseason finale against Buffalo. Jack Anderson is one of them. Alex now asking, all the interviews I see, there seems to be a quiet confidence with the direction of this team is heading from all the players. Everyone is happy to be in Carolina under Canales, it appears. Do you think the confidence comes from the players believing they are in the mix this year or the playoffs, for the playoffs, I believe he was trying to say, or is it a product of just a team being abysmal last year and everyone just excited to be part of a much more functional football team with better, more positive coaches? I'm sure the positivity that Dave Canales exudes, I mean, it's just like pouring out of him every day, which is great to have around after Frank Reich was, he was a negative, just was quiet. He wasn't this kind of peppy guy where every time Dave Canales is up there talking to the media and having sat in his press conferences, like, my God, like when he looks at you, sees like through you. It's just his energy. It's palpable, man. Like that absolutely helps. These guys have talked about Dave's positivity. They've also talked about how just honest he is. And players just want honesty from their coaches. Like if they got something wrong, let them know. If they're not in a spot to compete, let them know. They just want to be told the honest truth. And a lot of times coaches don't do that. Dave Canales is doing that. And he's also doing it with a smile on his face in a positive way, even if the information may not be positive, which these guys certainly appreciate as they're grown men. They want to be treated like grown men and professionals like they are. As far as the confidence, I know Shaq Thompson talked about this where back in June, he said he was surprised just by how quickly they all were able to come together and mesh defensively. And it makes sense when you have Josie Jewell's been in the system. Ashawn Robinson's been in the system. Nick Scott, Jordan Fuller, both been in the system as well. It's not like a bunch of random guys having to learn a defense. There's guys who have been in defense from last year. Now guys who are coming in who already been in defense before. And it's some other players who they think can help them out this season. And Jero Vero talked about that last Monday when speaking to us after practice, where they haven't really skipped a beat. They haven't had to go through that period of getting everybody acclimated, as most of the guys who are expected to start, aside from like Clowney, already know the defense. And that is great news to hear from a defense where there's a lot of questions. I guess it's Clowney and Dane Jackson. It's you guys who are really unfamiliar with his scheme in particular, having experience in it before, which they don't. So that kind of speaks to that confidence, I would think. I don't think any of these guys are going to the year thinking they're not going to compete for the playoffs and that they're going to be bad. Every single team is going into this year thinking they have a chance. And while the buzz might not be around this team, and I'm certainly coming up here and telling you I don't have great belief, but if they can triple their win total and win 6 games, I think that's a positive step in the right direction, and how we need to see what Bryce Young looks like in a competent offense and see some of these younger guys start to step up at some point in the season and show that maybe they didn't fail with the draft class once again, like they have typically done over the last, I don't know, 5, 10, maybe 30 years. So this franchise's history, I don't know. I don't know if at their honest, they're all competitors. They're not going to say that they don't believe. And I do think they believe. Are they crazy to believe? No, because it's possible. And Canales has come out and said, guys, we have an opportunity to determine what kind of team we're going to be. And it's within reach. It's not out of the realm of possibility that the offensive line is markedly better and that Bryce Young shows more consistency and we see more of the Packers Bryce than the Colts Bryce and the Bryce that we saw for the majority of the season. Not crazy to think that Deontay Johnson come out and you have a great season and Adam Thielen does it big again, and then Xavier Legette, he figures it out as he gets healthy and that this team can run the ball. It's not crazy to think that J.C. Horn stays healthy. The secondary, especially at safety, looks good. Shaq Thompson's healthy. It's not out of the realm of possibility, and it's still the NFC South. So I think they do truly believe they can compete. I don't think they will as far as for a playoff berth, but I do think that that confidence is real, and it's not artificial. And sometimes you got to have the artificial fake confidence if you're going to play football and make it to this level of the NFL. Last question coming from Steve. He says, Julian, give us your crystal ball prediction. Give us 5 Carolina Panthers you believe have a realistic chance to be a Pro Bowl player this year. Well, Derek Brown, number one. Unfortunately, he only got on there last year because of guys dropping out or going to the Super Bowl, which is crazy. He should have been a Pro Bowler no matter what. J.C. Horn, I think, stays healthy. That's a guy who should be a Pro Bowler, at least should be in consideration. And if the Panthers are no good again, it's going to be hard for them to get one, but even 2 guys onto the Pro Bowl. Now that Derek Brown has been a Pro Bowler, that's going to help him down the road to be a Pro Bowler. But J.C. Horn, I think realistically can be a Pro Bowler. Robert Hunt, I think can realistically be a Pro Bowler as he's going to pave the way in the interior of the offensive line to run the football. I think Chuba Hubbard's going to get enough carries this year to potentially be a Pro Bowler. I would also say Deontay Johnson as a number 1 target and having been a Pro Bowler before, and if he looks rejuvenated with Bryce Young, I think those are the 5. So Derek Brown, J.C. Horn, Robert Hunt, Chuba Hubbard, Deontay Johnson. I would only right now be willing to bet on Derek Brown as just people are going to overlook this team. And if they're 5-11 or 5-12, I guess 6-11, even 7-10, just don't think too many teams or people out there really looking at this team and seeing that star power, which they don't really have a lot of. Derek Brown, J.C. Horn, that's star power. And then Deontay Johnson potentially could be that, and there's some other guys as well. But I think those are the 5 that would really get the attention of the voters and potentially be Pro Bowlers this season. That's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe, follow the show free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, where the weekly Wednesday mailbag will be back on September 4th, heading into that week 1 matchup against New Orleans. All you got to do is at me or DM me to get your questions into me on Twitter at Julian Council. But in the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole as always and forever. Keep pounding. And on tomorrow's show, we'll talk about what to look for on Saturday in the preseason finale. And it's probably not going to be the Panther starters.